She landed the plane alone. Both pilots collapsed at 37,000 feet. 173 passengers had no idea what was coming. The only person who could save them was the quiet woman in seat 12F that everyone had ignored. Nobody knew that F-22 fighter pilots would soon whisper her legendary call sign in reverence. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Mitchell looked like everyone else on Flight 2847. She wore old jeans and a gray sweater. Her sneakers were white and worn. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She carried a paperback book and a cheap travel pillow. When the flight attendant asked what she wanted to drink, Sarah said, "Ginger ale, please." The attendant handed her the plastic cup without really looking at her. Just another passenger. The man in seat 12E tried to talk to her. "Business trip?" he asked. "Visiting family," Sarah said with a small smile. He nodded and started talking about his job in software sales. Sarah listened politely. She asked questions at the right times. "What do you do for work?" he finally asked. "I work in logistics," she said. It was not exactly a lie. She did move things from place to place. She coordinated complex operations. She just didn't mention that the things she moved were fighter jets traveling faster than sound. And the operations she coordinated were strike missions in enemy territory. Nobody on the plane knew the truth. The flight attendant didn't know. The businessman didn't know. The mother reading to her daughter 3 rows up didn't know. Nobody knew that the quiet woman in seat 12F was a legend. Her real name was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, retired. Her call sign was Solo. She had earned it 15 years ago during a mission over hostile territory. Her wingman was hit and forced to eject. She was left alone to complete the strike mission, evade enemy fighters, and fly home through a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in the region. She made it. Alone. That was just the beginning. Sarah had flown for 17 years. She started in F-16s, then moved to F-18s. She flew 3 combat tours. She became a test pilot. She became an instructor. The mission that earned her the call sign Solo became a legend in military aviation. She was deep behind enemy lines when anti-aircraft fire hit her wingman's plane. "I'm hit. I'm hit," his voice cracked over the radio. "Eject. Eject," Sarah commanded. She watched his parachute open. She watched him drift down safely. But now she was alone. The mission required 2 aircraft. Command told her to abort and return home. "Negative. I'm continuing to target," she said. "Solo, you are not authorized." She switched off that radio channel. She flew alone into the most dangerous airspace in the region. She completed the strike with perfect precision. Then she turned for home. But the sandstorm had rolled in. Winds were over 60 miles per hour. Visibility was 0. Every other aircraft in the region was grounded. Sarah flew through it for 2 hours using only instruments. She couldn't see anything outside her cockpit. Just brown swirling sand. When she finally landed, her commanding officer was waiting. "Solo," he said slowly. "You're either the bravest pilot I've ever met or the craziest." She smiled. "Why not both, sir?" The call sign stuck. Over the next decade, she built her reputation. She landed an F-18 on a carrier deck with no hydraulics, using only manual controls. The landing was so smooth the deck crew thought nothing was wrong until they tried to move the aircraft. She flew a test mission in an experimental aircraft that had a critical systems failure at 50,000 feet. The engineers told her to eject. She refused. She brought the plane down safely and landed it on a foam-covered runway with no landing gear. "How did you do that?" the lead engineer asked, his voice shaking. "I listened to what the plane was telling me," she said simply. Her final mission before retirement cemented her status as one of the finest pilots in modern military aviation. She was flying deep behind enemy lines when electronic warfare knocked out all her communications. She was separated from her squadron. Completely alone. She flew for 3 hours through hostile airspace with no contact. She completed her objective. She returned through a route between mountain peaks in terrible weather conditions. When she landed, her fuel gauge showed less than 5 minutes remaining. "How are you alive?" her commanding officer asked. "I fly alone," she said. "It's what I do." 6 months ago, at age 42, she retired. "I want to be normal," she told her squadron commander, Colonel Rodriguez. Everyone called him Viper. "You can never be normal, Solo," Viper said. "You're extraordinary. I want to try." So she became Sarah Mitchell, civilian. She bought regular clothes. She read paperback novels. She took commercial flights. She ordered ginger ale. She blended in. She wanted to be the woman in 12F that nobody noticed. The flight had been smooth for 2 hours. Captain Richardson came on the intercom to announce they were cruising at 37,000 feet. Everything was normal. Sarah was half asleep when she felt it. A tiny change in the engine sound, a small variation in the vibration. Her eyes opened. Most passengers wouldn't notice anything. The businessman beside her kept typing. The mother across the aisle kept reading. But Sarah's trained senses detected something wrong. The intercom clicked on. Captain Richardson's voice came through, but something was different. Something tight. "Folks, this is Captain Richardson. We're experiencing a minor technical issue. Nothing to be concerned about, but we're descending to a lower altitude as a precaution. Flight attendants, please return to your seats." Sarah's hands gripped the armrests. Minor technical issue was pilot code for something more serious. She had used that language herself many times. It meant, "Something is wrong, but I don't want to panic the passengers." The aircraft began descending. Sarah looked out the window. They were over mountains. Montana, probably. Then the intercom clicked on again. But this time no words came through. Just a strange sound, a gasp. Then silence. Dead air. Then it cut off. Around her, passengers began exchanging worried glances. The mother pulled her daughter closer. The businessman stopped typing. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. A flight attendant noticed immediately. "Ma'am, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened." "I need to speak with the captain," Sarah said. Her voice was calm but carried an authority that made the attendant pause. "That's not possible right now. Please sit down." Sarah was already moving forward. Her entire demeanor changed. She wasn't a casual passenger anymore. The flight attendant moved to block her path. "Ma'am, I need you to." "I'm a pilot," Sarah said quietly but firmly. "Military. I need to check on the flight crew right now." The attendant's eyes widened. Before she could respond, another attendant emerged from the cockpit. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. "Call for medical assistance," she said, her voice trembling. "Both pilots are unconscious. Something's wrong with them." The cabin erupted in frightened murmurs. Sarah pushed past the attendant and into the cockpit. Captain Richardson was slumped forward against his harness. Unconscious. The first officer was leaning back in his seat, eyes closed. Both were breathing but completely unresponsive. The cockpit smelled faintly of something chemical. Something that shouldn't be there. Sarah's mind raced. Carbon monoxide, some kind of fume event. It didn't matter right now. What mattered was that this Boeing 737 carrying 173 passengers was flying itself on autopilot. And they were still descending. She glanced at the altimeter. 22,000 feet and dropping. She reached for the radio. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 2847. We have a pilot emergency. Both flight crew are incapacitated. I am a passenger taking control of the aircraft. She waited for a response. Nothing. She tried again on different frequencies. Still nothing. Then she noticed the radio panel. Error codes were showing across multiple systems. Something had taken out their communication equipment. Sarah stood alone in that cockpit. 173 people were depending entirely on her. She had no way to communicate with the ground. No way to get guidance. No co-pilot to help with the workload. She was completely, utterly alone. She took a deep breath. Okay, Solo, she whispered to herself. You've done harder than this. Sarah slid into the captain's seat and adjusted it quickly. The Boeing 737 was different from the fighters she had flown. It was heavier, less responsive. But the principles were the same. Air moving over wings creates lift. Engines create thrust. Control surfaces change direction. The physics didn't change just because the airplane was bigger. She scanned the instruments, getting oriented. The autopilot was still engaged. That was good. It gave her time to think. They were at 19,000 feet now, still descending at 1,500 feet per minute. She needed to level off. She needed to assess the situation. She needed to figure out where to land. Her hands moved across the panel with practiced efficiency. She stopped the descent and leveled the aircraft at 15,000 feet. She noted their position on the navigation display. They were over central Montana, miles from any major airport. She pulled up the moving map and started searching for options. Billings was too far. Bozeman was too far. She needed somewhere closer. Then she saw it. Great Falls International. A mid-sized airport 40 miles ahead. It had long runways. More than enough for a 737. That was her target. She turned the aircraft toward Great Falls. Her fingers found the heading selector and rotated it smoothly. The 737 banked gently, settling onto the new course. She checked the fuel. They had plenty. No issues there. She checked the engines. Running normally. She went through all the systems methodically, looking for anything else that might be damaged or malfunctioning. Everything seemed normal except the communication systems, which were completely dead. A flight attendant appeared at the cockpit door. Her voice was trembling. What do we do? Should we tell the passengers? Sarah kept her eyes on the instruments. Tell them we have the situation under control. Have everyone remain seated with seatbelts fastened. And I need you to open all the air vents in the cabin. Maximum flow. Whatever affected the pilots came through the air system. We need to flush it out. Are you sure you can fly this? Sarah allowed herself the briefest smile. Yeah. I can fly this. But it wasn't that simple. Flying was one thing. Landing a Boeing 737 without any assistance, without communication, without a co-pilot to help, that was something else entirely. She had landed plenty of aircraft solo. But they had all been designed for single-pilot operations. The 737 was built with the assumption that two trained professionals would be working together, dividing responsibilities, backing each other up. She would have to be both pilots. She would have to fly the aircraft, navigate, configure it for landing, run all the checklists, manage the engines, the flaps, the landing gear, the speed, the altitude, everything. All while making an approach to an airport she had never landed at before. With no tower guidance. No weather information. And no way to coordinate with other traffic that might be in the area. Sarah's hands moved steadily across the controls. She had been in impossible situations before. The key was to break it down. Prioritize. Take it one step at a time. At 30 miles out, Sarah began her descent again. This time under her control. She throttled back the engines, feeling the aircraft respond. The autopilot was still engaged for now, helping her maintain precise altitude and heading. But she would have to hand-fly the landing. There was no way around that. She needed to feel the aircraft. To sense what it was doing. To make the tiny corrections that would get them safely on the ground. She started running through the landing checklist in her mind. She would need to configure the aircraft gradually. Extending flaps in stages. Getting the landing gear down at the right time, maintaining the correct speed at each phase. Normally, the pilot flying would call for settings and the pilot monitoring would make them happen. She would have to do both. Moving her hands between the control yoke and the various switches and levers. Never losing track of what the aircraft was doing. At 20 miles out, she began configuring. She reached for the flap lever with her right hand, keeping her left hand on the yoke. She extended them to position 1. She felt the aircraft slow. She adjusted power to maintain her descent rate. At 15 miles out, she disconnected the autopilot. The yoke came alive in her hands. Suddenly she was flying. Really flying. The 737 responded differently than her fighters had. It was heavier, more ponderous. But she adjusted quickly. She made a small correction, feeling the aircraft's momentum, learning its personality. Every plane flew a little differently. Had its own quirks and characteristics. She had to learn this one fast. Flaps 5, she said aloud. The old habit of calling out actions came back automatically, even though there was no co-pilot to acknowledge. She reached for the flap lever with her right hand while her left maintained control. She extended them to the next position. She felt the increased drag. She added power to compensate. At 10 miles out, she could see the airport clearly. 2 runways in an X pattern. She would take the longer one. Runway 03, pointing northeast. The wind was light, coming from the northwest. She would have a slight crosswind, but nothing she couldn't handle. What concerned her more was the possibility of other traffic. Great Falls was a moderate-sized airport. There could be other aircraft in the pattern, on approach, on the ground. She had no way to warn them. No way to coordinate. She would have to keep her eyes open in hope. Gear down, she called out. Her hand found the landing gear lever. She pulled it down. She felt the rumble as the massive wheels extended and locked into place. 3 green lights confirmed they were down and locked. Flaps 15. She extended them further. The aircraft slowed more. She needed more power now to maintain her approach speed. At 5 miles out, she was at 2,000 feet. Perfectly positioned on the glide path. Her hands made constant tiny corrections. Adjusting for wind, for speed, for altitude. She was in the zone now. That state where everything else fell away. Where there was only her and the aircraft, connected, moving together. This was what she had always been good at. This pure connection between pilot and machine. Flaps 30, she said. At 3 miles, the 737 slowed further. It was configured now, almost completely for landing. She checked her speed. 145 knots, right where it should be. Altitude 1,000 feet. The runway was ahead. A long strip of concrete growing larger. She could see hangars. Terminal buildings. A few parked aircraft. And then she saw the other plane. A small Cessna was just lifting off from runway 21, the crossing runway. It was climbing, turning. It would pass right through her approach path in about 30 seconds. Her heart rate didn't increase. She had dealt with worse. She made a quick calculation. She adjusted her descent rate slightly, steepening it just enough to pass under the Cessna's climb path with safe separation. Flaps full, she called at 500 feet. The final flap setting. The 737 was completely configured now. Committed to landing. She made a small correction for a wind gust, keeping the nose perfectly aligned with the runway's centerline. Her right hand hovered over the throttles, ready to add power if needed. Ready to go around if anything went wrong, though with no co-pilot and the complexity of reconfiguring the aircraft, a go-around would be much more dangerous than normal. At 200 feet, she began the flare. Gently pulling back on the yoke, raising the nose slightly, beginning the transition from descent to landing attitude. The runway rose up to meet her. At 50 feet, she pulled the throttles to idle with her right hand. Her left hand continued to ease back on the yoke. Feeling for the ground. The main wheels touched with barely a chirp. A perfect touchdown, right on the numbers. She let the nose wheel come down gently. Then she immediately deployed the speed brakes with her left hand while her right went back to the throttles, pulling them into reverse. The roar of the reversers filled the cockpit as the aircraft decelerated rapidly. Her feet worked the rudder pedals, keeping them tracking straight down the centerline. She pressed the brakes smoothly. The massive aircraft slowed. They rolled down the runway, speed bleeding off. Finally, 3,000 feet down the 10,000-foot runway, she brought them to a complete stop. She sat there for a moment, hands still on the controls, and let out a long breath. Then she reached up and shut down the engines. The sudden silence was profound. Sarah sat in the captain's seat and allowed herself 5 seconds to feel the weight lift from her shoulders. Then she was moving again. She needed to get medical help for the pilots. Evacuate the passengers safely. Figure out what had happened. She stood and opened the cockpit door. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers were crying. Some were praying. Others were simply staring at her in disbelief. The flight attendant who had questioned her earlier was wiping tears from her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved everyone." Sarah shook her head. "Just doing what needed to be done. Now let's get medical help for the pilots and get everyone off safely." Emergency vehicles were already racing toward the aircraft, their lights flashing. Someone on the ground had seen their landing and understood it was an emergency. Within minutes, paramedics were on board treating the pilots. The passengers were being evacuated down the emergency slides. What Sarah didn't know was that her landing hadn't gone completely unnoticed. When Flight 2847 had lost communication and air traffic control couldn't raise them, protocols had been initiated. 2 F-22 Raptors from Malmstrom Air Force Base, just 80 miles away, had been scrambled to intercept and assess the situation. They had arrived just as Sarah began her final approach. Major Jake "Hawk" Morrison watched from 30,000 feet as the 737 made its approach. "Tower, this is Raptor 11. I have visual on the target aircraft. Appears to be making an approach to Great Falls. No apparent distress signals." "Copy that, Raptor 11. We have no communication with that aircraft. Their transponder shows emergency code." Hawk watched through his targeting pod as the 737 descended. Perfectly controlled, perfectly stable. Whoever was flying that thing knew what they were doing. He saw the landing gear extend. The flaps deploy in stages. The aircraft maintained a beautiful approach path. Then he saw the near miss with the Cessna. Saw the Boeing adjust its descent just enough. Saw it continue down. "Raptor 12, are you seeing this?" he called to his wingman. "Copy. That's some impressive flying. Who's at the controls?" "Don't know. But they can fly." They watched as the 737 touched down. Smooth as silk. Rolled out and stopped. "Tower, target aircraft has landed safely at Great Falls. Flight appears to be under control." "Copy, Raptor 11. Good eyes." Return to base. But Hawk's curiosity was piqued. When he landed back at Malmstrom, he made some calls. What he learned made him grab his wingman and head straight to the operations center. The duty officer looked up as they entered. The 2847 situation, Hawk said. Yeah, crazy story. Both pilots were incapacitated by some kind of fume event. A passenger landed the plane. What passenger? The duty officer checked his notes. Female passenger, gave her name as Sarah Mitchell. Said she was military. Took control of the aircraft. Can you run that name? Mitchell, Sarah. The duty officer typed into his terminal. Then his eyes widened. Holy. What? She's in the system. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, retired. Call sign. He looked up at Hawk. Her call sign is Solo. Hawk felt his stomach drop. Wait. The Solo? According to this, yeah, 17 years active duty, flew F-16s and F-18s. 3 combat tours. Test pilot qualification, instructor pilot. He scrolled down. Jesus. Her record is insane. Look at this mission list. Hawk leaned over to read the screen. With each line, his respect grew. He had heard stories about Solo. Legends, really. Tales that got passed around pilot bars about the aviator who could do impossible things. The landing in the sandstorm, the carrier landing with no hydraulics. The Solo penetration mission that everyone said couldn't be done. He had always thought they were exaggerated. That no one could really be that good. She landed a 737 by herself, his wingman breathed. No co-pilot. No comms. Hawk shook his head slowly. And we just watched her do it. That approach was textbook perfect. The duty officer was still reading. Says here she retired 6 months ago, turned down multiple offers to continue flying, wanted to go civilian. He looked up. She was just a passenger. She was traveling home and this happened. Hawk picked up the secure phone and dialed the number for fighter operations at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, one of the main fighter training centers. When Colonel Sarah Viper Rodriguez answered, he said, Viper, it's Hawk at Malmstrom. I need to tell you something. What's up? Solo just landed a commercial airliner. Alone. Both pilots down. No comms. She saved 173 people. There was a long silence. Then Viper's voice came back, quiet and filled with something like awe. Solo did what? You heard me. Sarah Mitchell was a passenger on a 737. Pilots went down. She took over and landed it. Solo. We watched from up top. It was beautiful flying, Viper. Perfect. Another silence. Then Viper said softly, of course it was. It's Solo. The story spread through military aviation channels like wildfire. By that evening, pilots at bases around the world were hearing about it. The reactions were all similar. Initial disbelief, followed by confirmation, followed by a kind of reverent respect that pilots reserved for only the most exceptional of their peers. At Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, a group of F-22 pilots were in the briefing room when someone pulled up the news footage on the big screen. It showed the 737 on the ground at Great Falls. Emergency vehicles surrounding it, passengers evacuating. The news anchor was talking about the miraculous landing by a mysterious passenger. One of the pilots, Captain Mike Frost Hansen, pulled up the military database on his tablet. Wait. Let me check something. He typed quickly, then went very still. Guys, the passenger who landed that plane. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Her call sign is Solo. The room went silent. Every head turned to look at him. One of the senior pilots, a lieutenant colonel with 20 years in fighters, stood up slowly. Solo. As in Solo, the one and only. The lieutenant colonel walked to the window, staring out at the F-22s on the flight line. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. Solo saved 173 people today. Landed a Boeing 737 by herself. No help. No comms. He turned back to face the room. That's the kind of pilot she is. That's the kind of aviator we all hope to be. Another pilot, a young captain fresh from training, asked, "Is she really that good?" "I've heard the stories, but..." The lieutenant colonel cut him off. "The stories don't do her justice. I flew with Solo once, years ago, on a training exercise. I've never seen anyone command an aircraft like she did. It wasn't just flying. It was like the plane was part of her. Like she could feel what it was thinking." He paused. "The stories are real. All of them." At Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, the story reached a squadron of F-22 pilots who had been on a training mission. When they landed and heard the news, their squadron commander, a colonel named Raymond "Blade" Wilson, called them together. "Listen up. I need to tell you about a pilot. Her call sign is Solo. Today she did something that most of us couldn't do, even with full crew in perfect conditions. She landed a commercial airliner by herself after both pilots were incapacitated. No assistance. No communication. Just her skills and her nerve." He paused, looking at each of them. "Solo is why we train. She's why we push ourselves. She represents the absolute pinnacle of what a pilot can be. And today, as a civilian, just a passenger, she proved it again." One of his pilots raised a hand. "Sir, did you ever fly with her?" Blade smiled. "Once. 5 years ago. She was evaluating a new weapons system. I was flying chase. She did things with that aircraft that the engineers said were impossible. And she did them smoothly, like it was easy." He looked around the room again. "She's retired now. Wanted a normal life. But today, when people needed her, she stepped up. And she didn't just save them. She gave them a perfect landing. Because that's what Solo does." The story continued to spread. By the next day, it had reached international fighter squadrons. RAF pilots at Lakenheath in England. French Rafale pilots at St. Dizier. Japanese F-15 pilots at Komatsu. German Eurofighter pilots at Newburgh. All of them heard about Solo and the commercial airliner. And all of them reacted the same way, with quiet, profound respect. Sarah Mitchell didn't know about any of this. She was sitting in a hotel room in Great Falls, trying to process what had happened. The FAA was investigating. The airline was grateful. The passengers were calling her a hero. She just felt tired. When her phone rang and it was Colonel Rodriguez, she almost didn't answer. "Solo," Viper's voice said warmly. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired. I heard what you did." The whole community heard. Sarah sighed. "I just landed a plane, Viper. It's what we're trained for. Don't diminish it. You landed a Boeing 737. Solo. No co-pilot. No comms. That's not just training. That's art. That's mastery. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Viper said firmly. "You did what only Solo could do. And every fighter pilot in the Air Force knows it. They're talking about you, Sarah. The F-22 guys who were on station, watching you, they're in awe. I've gotten calls from 3 different bases. Do you know what they're saying?" "What?" "They're saying your call sign with reverence. Because to them, it's sacred. You represent something we all aspire to. And today you proved why that call sign means what it means." Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. I just wanted to be normal. You can never be normal, Solo. You're extraordinary. And that's okay. Today you saved 173 people because you're extraordinary. Embrace it. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the dark hotel room and thought about what Viper had said. She had spent her whole career trying to be the best. Pushing herself. Taking impossible missions. Earning that call sign through countless solo operations where everything depended on her alone. And now, even in retirement, even trying to be anonymous, that same calling had found her again. 3 days later, back at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Hawk was flying a routine patrol when his radio crackled. Raptor 11, this is Raptor 27. Just wanted to say something. Go ahead, 27. There was a pause. Then a voice he didn't recognize. Young and respectful, almost reverent. Solo landed that plane. I heard it was Solo. Hawk felt a smile cross his face. Confirmed, 27. It was her. Another pause. Then, so quietly it was almost lost in the static, Solo. The way the young pilot said it, like a prayer, like an invocation, carried the weight of every impossible thing she had done. Every life she had saved. Every mission she had completed when everyone else said it couldn't be done. Over the next weeks, it became a tradition. Fighter pilots, when they heard her story, would say her call sign once. Quietly. With that same reverence. Not loud. Not as a cheer. But as a recognition of mastery. Of excellence. Of a pilot who represented the absolute peak of their profession. In ready rooms and cockpits, in briefing rooms and pilot bars, the story was told and retold. The woman who had seemed so ordinary. Who had been overlooked by everyone. Who had been just another face in the crowd. Until the moment came when lives hung in the balance, when the impossible was required. When someone had to fly an aircraft alone and save everyone aboard. And she had done it. Not just done it, but done it perfectly. Years later, a young F-22 pilot named Lieutenant Sarah Chen would be on patrol when she heard her instructor, a veteran with 15 years of fighter experience, say quietly over the radio. If you ever wonder how good a pilot can be, remember Solo. Remember the commercial airliner she landed alone. That's the standard. That's what we reach for. And Lieutenant Chen would key her mic and reply, her voice filled with the same quiet reverence. Solo. The word would hang in the air for a moment. Carried over military radio frequencies. Spoken in hushed respect by those who understood what it meant. Not just a call sign. Not just a name. But a symbol of mastery. Of excellence. Of a pilot who could do the impossible alone. Because that's what Solo meant. When everyone else needed help, she flew alone. When the situation was impossible, she made it possible. When lives depended on perfection, she delivered perfection. And fighter pilots around the world, the best of the best, the elite aviators who commanded the skies in the most advanced aircraft ever created, they would hear her name and whisper it with reverence. Solo. The woman who landed the plane alone. The legend who saved 173 lives through mastery of her craft. The pilot whose call sign would be whispered in reverence for generations to come.